Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wrongfully Heard Podcast. This is the Wrongfully Heard Podcast.
And wrongfully convicted.
In this case, nobody got justice.
Was wrongly convicted of a miscarriage of justice. Found new scientific evidence proving her innocence.
So today we are back for another case review. Last week we did more of a theory review. I hope you enjoyed that and thank you for watching that one. So today we are going to be talking about the Andrew Mallard case of wrongful conviction. And so I will pop the timestamps up over here. And without further ado, let's get into it. So 12 years, 4,380 days. That's the time it takes for the world to reinvent itself, for children to grow into adults, for technology to advance, and for the truth to be buried under the weight of a state's refusal to admit it was wrong. From 1994 to 2008, Andrew Mark Mallard sat in a Western Australian prison cell for the brutal murder of Pamela Lawrence, which he did not commit. His conviction was not an accident, it was a construction. It was the result of a system that prioritized the finality of a verdict over the integrity of the evidence shown. Today we are deconstructing the anatomy of failure. We are looking into how investigative tunnel vision, a psychological state where investigators become so anchored into a single theory that they filter all contradictory data. The 12-year gap between Mallard's conviction and his exoneration represents more than just a loss of time. It represents a systemic erosion of the duty of disclosure. To understand how a man could be vanished by the law, we have to go back to May 1994, to a small business in Mosburn Park, Western Australia, and a crime scene that offered a specific, vibrant clue that the police chose to ignore. The crime. The murder of Pamela Lawrence. So on May 23rd, 1994, 45-year-old Pamela Lawrence was closing her shop, Flora Metallica. She was a woman of craft and community, but that evening she became the victim of an unspeakable ferocity. She was struck at least 12 times with a blunt object. The forensic reality of the scene was haunting. Embedded within the fatal wounds was a highly specific trace of evidence: Prussian Blue paint pigment. This wasn't a generic clue, but it was a forensic roadmap. Yet, as investigators processed the shot, they encountered what we in criminology call the forensic void. So, the forensic void has 4 sections. So, the footprints, the murder weapon, biological transfer, and the blue paint. So, first of all, the footprints. Despite the brutality of the crime and the potential for blood splatter, no identifiable footprints were recovered. Second is the murder weapon. The killer carried the weapon away. No blunt object was left at the Flora Metallica. Biological transfer. Extensive testing found no blood of the deceased on the clothing of the primary suspects. And the blue paint. No traces of the specific paint pigment were ever linked to Andrew Mallard's possessions. There was, however, one critical clue. So a partial palm print left on the glass counter. In 1994, that print remained unmatched. A silent witness waiting for the technology of the future to give it a name. But the major crime squad didn't have time for silence. They needed a character for the role of the killer, and they found one in a psychiatric ward of Greylands Hospital. The wrong man, Andrew Mark Mallard. So Andrew Mallard was a man of profound vulnerability. When the police set their sights on him, he was being held for minor offenses in the closed psychiatric ward. Mallard lived in a transient lifestyle. He was a heavy cannabis user and most crucially was suffering from bipolar disorder. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. O'Day diagnosed him as being in the hypomanic phase, characterized by a grandiose delusions of a rich fantasy life. So in a hypomanic phase, it's basically a phase where you believe that you can do anything. You are feeling intense euphoria, intense positive mood, and feel like you're invincible. Mallard was a frequent fabricator. He claimed he could speak 6 languages, that he was an undercover operative, even a Viking warrior. This is where the investigation took a predatory turn. Dr. O'Day noted that while Mallard's cognition is intact, his overall social judgment appears impaired. In the eyes of a legal analyst, Mallard was the ultimate unreliable historian. To an investigator seeking a quick resolution, however, his impairment was an asset. Mallard was a man who was desperate to please, desperate to be heard, and possessed of a mind that could lead him to a labyrinth of suggestion. The police didn't just find a suspect, they found a canvas. Investigative tunnel vision. The chosen target versus the ignored lead. By June, the major crime squad had succumbed to a classic case of cognitive closure. They had stopped searching for a killer and started building one. They necessitated the active dismissal of any evidence that pointed away from Mallard. So there was a lead that was ignored. Lloyd Pierce. So Pierce was a credible witness, reported seeing a Caucasian male around the age of 20 to 25. He was carrying a backpack and he had blonde wavy hair. He was running from the alley behind Flora Metallica at exactly 6 p.m. This is the height of the crime's timeline. Rather than treating Pierce's evidence as a vital resource, police executed a hostile search warrant on his home, alienated him, and permanently wrote him off the lead within 24 hours. The chosen target, Andrew Mallard. Despite having no forensic link to the scene and no verifiable alibi, Mallard became the sole focus. The strategy shifted from the investigation to fitting the crime to the man. The danger of confirmation bias. The absence of Mallard's DNA or footprints wasn't seen as proof of his innocence, but rather as a challenge to be overcome through the interrogation process. The confessions on June 10th and June 17th. On June 10th, Mallard was removed from the psychiatric hospital and brought to police headquarters. This was on the same day he was released. For 8.5 hours, Mallard was subjected to relentless questioning by Detective Sergeant Caphorn. He had no legal counsel, the interviews were unrecorded, and it wasn't until 7.5 hours into the ordeal that he was finally cautioned about his right to silence. Exhausted and mentally compromised, Mallard broke down. He didn't confess in the traditional sense. He began guessing and theorizing details that could have happened in the third person. He spoke of this evil person who was very scared. He explicitly told the detectives what he was imagining the killer would do. In criminology, we recognize this is a coerced-compliant false confession. The moment the pressure eased during breaks, Mallard's reality would snap back. He repeatedly stated, "I did not murder Pamela Lawrence. I made it all up." But the police had the imagination they needed. It wasn't until Mallard was so fed up with this interview that he actually bit one of the police officers on the leg, and that is when he was released from this relentless questioning. So now the police just had to manufacture the physical evidence to match the story that they have created. The machinery of deception. Suppressed evidence and fabricated links. When forensics failed to confirm the confession, the investigation moved from incompetence to active deception. The murder weapon, the Sid chrome wrench. Under intense pressure, Mallard had sketched a Sid chrome wrench as the potential murder weapon. The test. So on June 24th, 1994, forensic pathologist Dr. Cook and the police struck a pig's head with a wrench matching Mallard's sketch to see if it replicated the injuries. The result, the wrench was physically incapable of causing the injuries sustained by Mrs. Lawrence. So how did police cover up this scientific test? So no formal report was requested from Dr. Cook. This failed test, a piece of exculpatory evidence, was excluded from the brief of evidence and hidden from the defense. The second piece of suppressed evidence was the salt water test. Mallard, in the state of imagining, he theorized that the killer washed his clothes in the ocean at Stirling Bridge. So the original finding by chemist Bernard Lynch said the residual soluble salts detected that the clothing items were not consistent with the immersion in river water. So the action. Detective Sergeant Sherville explicitly instructed Lynch to delete the negative finding from his final report. The jury was led to believe that the forensics supported the confession, when the truth was the exact opposite. Fabricated Links, Operation Huntsman. When the suppression wasn't enough, the major crime squad initiated Operation Huntsman. They sent an undercover cop named Gary to befriend Mallard, providing him with alcohol and driving him to buy cannabis. So, the irony. Detective Sergeants Sherville and Capehorn collected unique flora-dipped jewelry, the victim's own handiwork, directly from the shop. The plant. So, the undercover police officer handed Mallard cheap costume jewelry, and the transfer police later used the witness sightings of Mallard with the jewelry to build a circumstantial link, while deliberately failing to disclose that their own agent had provided the items. The deception extended to the witness stand. Consider Catherine Barson, a 13-year-old girl who saw a man near the scene. A 13-year-old witness has to be handled carefully because their statements can be altered quickly and their memory can be compromised. So Catherine's original statement said that she saw a man with a beard and an orangey gypsy scarf. The rest was blue, green, and a cream color. So the story changed to Mallard actually having a mustache, and the scarf color changed to match the colors of Mallard's red, yellow, and black cap. So another witness was Michelle Engelhart, and her original statement was that she stated that Mallard's cap was hanging on the door while he was out. And then the second statement, which was post-police pressure, that she did not see a cap and had very much uncertainty for where Andrew's whereabouts were. Detective Sergeant Sherville recorded these material shifts in the major crime running sheets as being amended to exclude hearsay. As someone who studied criminology, this is a deliberate falsehood designed to position the legal record. So now we're going to be talking about prosecutorial failure. So the trial was conducted in 1995, and this was the final failure that occurred basically in the Temple of Justice. The duty of disclosure is the cornerstone of a fair trial. It requires the prosecution to provide the defense with all the evidence they have received, especially the ones that might prove innocent, because Prosecutors are not fighting for the victim. They are not trying to convict the defendant. They are supposed to be ministers of justice. We have talked about this in cases and cases and cases again, and there clearly is a correlation between prosecutors and wrongful conviction. So, Senior Prosecutor Ken Bates failed his duty. Bates explicitly ran with the trial on the wrench theory, despite knowing it was unverified by Dr. Cook. When Dr. Cook was on the stand, Bates never asked him if the wrench could have caused the injuries. More chillingly, Bates had read the police summary mentioning the failed pig heads test, and he later claimed he simply overlooked it. One must maintain a high degree of skepticism here. How does a senior prosecutor overlook the primary forensic test of an alleged murder weapon? Bates prioritized securing a conviction over the fundamental search for truth, transforming the trial into a rubber stamp for police misconduct. Justice delayed, so the real killer and exoneration. The tragedy of the Mallard case is that the truth was always there, sitting in a file. In 2006, a cold case review finally ran the partial palm print from the glass counter through a modern database. It matched Simon Rochford. The cost of the state's tunnel vision is measured in blood. Just 7 weeks after Pamela Lawrence was murdered in 1994, Simon Rochford, the man the police ignored while they were busy breaking Andrew Mallard, he murdered his girlfriend. Her name was Bridgetta Dickens. He used a strikingly similar method, blunt force trauma to the head. Because the system was obsessed with the vulnerable man, Andrew Mallard, from a psychiatric ward, they left a killer on the streets to strike again. When Rochford was named the suspect in 2006, he committed suicide in the prison cell the following morning. The Crime Corruption Commission's findings. Accountability and the ultimate cost. So in 2008, the Crime and Corruption Commission, also known as the CCC, they basically laid down all the places where misconduct and corruption occurred. So 3 people were called out as committing misconduct in this case. So we had Assistant Commissioner, formerly Detective Sergeant Malcolm Sherville. So misconduct, he directed the chemist to delete the saltwater test results. He also altered witness statements without regard for original recollections. He also made false entries within the police running sheets. And he failed to disclose the pig head test and the original statements regarding that. And then we had Assistant Commissioner, formerly Detective Sergeant David Caporn. He wrote misleading letters to deny bail, co-altering witness statements to fit the Mallard profile. And finally, the prosecutorial misconduct. The CCC found that Senior Prosecutor Ken Bates committed misconduct. So running a trial on a murder weapon theory which he knew was unverified and failing to ask the pathologist about the wrench. He also failed his fundamental duty to disclose the exculpatory pig head test to the defense. So the ultimate cost of this. The CCC's findings were clear. This was a systemic failure. Falsifying public records and suppressing evidence are not just errors, they are crimes against the concept of justice. The ultimate cost of the Andrew Mallard case is a warning that echoes today. It represents a danger of a system that values a win over the truth. Andrew Mallard lost 12 years of his life to a fantasy built by the people that are sworn to protect him and society. Unfortunately, in 2019, Andrew Mallard did pass away from a hit-and-run incident in New York. So this story did end extremely tragically. My heart goes out to Andrew Mallard's family and anyone who was involved in this case. This case is riddled with police prosecutorial misconduct, and just it's a tragedy to see that the justice system, who is supposed to lock away the guilty and protect the innocent, did the complete opposite in this case. Alright, so thank you for everyone watching the Wrongfully Heard podcast this week. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Let me know your thoughts on Andrew Mallard's case down in the comments below. And if you're on YouTube, please subscribe. And if you're on Spotify, please follow. And if you are interested in these types of cases, head over to my TikTok page to learn a bit more. I post every single day, so yeah. Thank you so much for watching the Wrongfully Heard podcast, where we give voices to those who once were not heard. Bye everyone.